Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this beautiful Wednesday as we have a really fantastic panel discussion today, talking and exploring ways that we can be supportive of our queer and trans students amongst the pandemic. So my name is Nicole Willier-Fenton. I have the good fortune of working in UVM's Continuing and Distance Education Department. I'm really looking forward to introducing our panelists in just a few minutes. I just want to go through a few logistics. All the folks joining us on YouTube, we are really looking forward to your comments and your questions today. So we will have our team grabbing your questions and pasting them into the chat box for our panelists and presenters today. And the panelists have asked a great request. If you want to include your pronouns as you ask those questions today, that would be incredibly helpful. Not required, but just a thoughtful request from one of our panelists. We are recording this as well, so we will share out the presentation in a few days to maybe next week as well. And any links that are shared throughout the presentation, we will also share those in the follow-up email also. We look forward to your questions, so please do put them in the chat box, and we will work to get those questions to our panelists throughout the presentation, and then we will have an opportunity to have more of a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. We're going to go over introductions in just a moment. You'll introduce all of the folks that you see on the screen with us today. We're going to go over queer and trans student success and support, what resources are available through the University of Vermont for students as well, and resources from Outright as well. We have a woman from Outright that can join us in sharing some of the amazing opportunities that organization has for students and the community. And we're also so excited to share with you that this is a learning opportunity for you as well. And we have a digital badge for participation. We recently rolled out digital badges for our webinars when there's amazing learning opportunities. So I'll share that with you at the end of the presentation and how you can gain that digital badge for your participation in the panel today in the discussion. So who is with us today? I'm so happy to introduce one of my professors and a man that I keep learning constantly from. I'm so thankful that Jay Garvey is with us today. He is the Friedman Hipps Green and Gold Professor of Education and Program Coordinator for the Higher Education and Student Affairs Administration Program, and a former Student Affairs Professional, Academic Advisor, QT, Student Involvement Advocacy, Undergrad Research, Student Affairs Assessment, and all-around amazing professor. Jay, thank you so much for being with us today. Joining Jay is Alex Hazard. Alex is a Student Empowerment Coordinator for the PRISM Center and other student affairs area of expertise, residential life, diversity and inclusion, assessment, and curriculum building. Alex, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us. And Mara joins us as well, the Director of Education for Outright Vermont, such an amazing organization that has done so much good in our community over the last several years, and areas of expertise, LGBTQ and youth inclusivity, student supports in schools, recognizing, countering implicit bias, and racial justice education and advocacy. Mara, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be a part of this discussion. And as our moderator today, one of my colleagues in the Continuing and Distance Education Department is Jess Akey. She's a program developer in UVM's Continuing and Distance Education. Her areas of expertise, educational program development, communication studies, and mass media studies. And Jess is going to lead us in the discussion today. So I'm going to pass that off. I'm going to unmute Jess's mic for her. Jess, why don't you take us through what we're going to talk about today? Jess?
Okay, hi. Thank you, Nicole, for that introduction to today's webinar. And thank you to everybody who is here today to participate in this important discussion. I helped to convene this panel of experts and professionals who do the important work to help LGBTQ folks find their voice and their people. Our goal for today is to uplift queer and trans student voices, to address ways that they can access respectful and inclusive communities during this stressful time of transitions as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I, as the moderator, will be transitioning and introducing our presenters, possibly listening to ask my own questions, but we'd love questions from those of you who are listening today. And as Nicole previously said, you can write those in the chat box. We'll also be trying to keep up with those that are coming from our YouTube audience. And I'm going to do my best to flag those for appropriate times to ask our presenters. And then also at the end, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers also. And as Nicole mentioned, if you'd like to include your preferred pronoun when you are asking a question, that is welcome. So our first presenter today, as Nicole introduced, is Jay Harvey. He's Associate Professor within the College of Education and Social Services at University of Vermont. And Jay is going to introduce us to the role and importance of student success.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. As mentioned before, my name is Jay, and I use he, him pronouns. And I wanted to begin by saying that I situate this presentation and my participation in it through my positionality as a queer person and through my experiences in post-secondary education. My individual journey through education and my professional pursuits in student affairs and now my scholarly work to uplift queer and trans collegians are so closely etched to my heart and mind that it's hard to disentangle my queerness from my role as an educator. And so in all that I do, I want to celebrate and uplift collective liberation for queer and trans people through education. Wanted to give a quick shout out to queer and trans attendees who are joining us today. Hello, I love you all. I'm so glad that you're here. For a lot of this, I'm going to be speaking directly to you, and then we'll have the ancillary benefit of hetero and cis viewership to benefit from the lessons that we're providing to you all individually. Because when society and institutions fail to include us in success initiatives or in community, we will uplift our own communities in solidarity and love. So that's the message that I wanted to start with. As a professor, I've been asked to provide a scholarly overview of the beautiful resources that are going to be provided later in this presentation. So I first wanted to start with the emphasis that queer and trans people are a gift. And the subtext of this is we are avoiding deficit-based language and deficit-based resource allocation and anything that puts queer and trans people as less than. From a scholarly perspective and among administrators, folks often view queer and trans students in comparison to their heterosexual cisgender peers, particularly with social and academic and career achievements. Oftentimes, this manifests by people creating a deficit-based disparity between queer and trans people and cis hetero people to demonstrate a need. So such comparisons are often very well intentioned to advocate for more resources or to improve policies, but they place onus on queer and trans students to uplift themselves rather than acknowledging the detrimental impact of queerphobia, transphobia, racism, classism, and other intersections of oppression on queer and trans student success. So by framing queer and trans people as a gift and as a blessing to UVM, to the Burlington community, and to society writ large, we are dispelling the myth that we are people who have to be fixed, but emphasizing that it is oppressive institutions and systems that are creating these disparities. When we create comparative conversations that place queer and trans students as less than, it can have detrimental impacts on us individually as people, in institutions, and how folks view queer and trans people, and then broadly in society by needing to demonstrate disparities to prove our worth. And so we're going to avoid all of that deficit talk today. And we choose to view queer and trans students as resilient, as community sustaining, and as an invaluable asset, gift, and a blessing to UVM, to our lives, to Burlington, and to the broader community. Okay, So I wanted to just give a quick overview from a higher ed scholarship and practice perspective about student success. Defining student success is a really difficult task. It is so broad, it is very institutionally driven, and each stakeholder at a school likely has different motives and different ways of understanding student success. For us, we wanted to frame success within multiply oppressive systems, interpersonally, societally, and institutionally. I wanted to recognize that from a higher ed, scholarship, and professional perspective, queer and trans students are often very much not included in the lexicon of student success frameworks. And those are really important historical reasons to talk about. The dearth of policies that include queer and trans people, the dearth of initiatives to promote student success among queer and trans people, the dearth of legislation statewide and federally. There are a lot of historical reasons why queer and trans people have not been part of the broader conversation of success. As a community, as a scholarly community, as an administrative community, as a local Burlington community, this is our time. We are at a critical juncture where it is academically, administratively, and I would argue morally necessary to re-examine our assumptions about success among students so we can better acknowledge and center and celebrate queer and trans students in this body of work. Now, I know one of my dear colleagues and research collaborators is watching. I want to give a shout out and a hello to Dolan. Dolan is a second-year doctoral student in educational leadership at the University of Vermont, and they are a former queer and trans student services professional. Dolan and I just recently wrote this great chapter on queer and trans student success, and we approached it from a nested, holistic perspective. And I wanted to frame this conversation being inspired by Dolan and the chapter that we co-wrote together. So to define queer and trans student success, it requires a holistic understanding of students' academic, social, community, and personal experiences. And then we can start understanding the barriers and gateways for promoting success among queer and trans students. So, like I mentioned before, student success is a really complicated landscape that requires a nested understanding of how different environments impact our thriving in education. I often like to think of it from a nested perspective where at the core are queer and trans people in all of our brilliance. And then within that, we are situated in relationships with peers, with families, chosen and biological, with relationships with faculty and staff. And then all of those relationships are situated within our experiences within institutions. For my case, that's the University of Vermont. And then the institution of UVM is situated within society. Assets of each of these dimensions as they relate to student success. So for ourselves, as queer and trans people, the first thing I want to emphasize is the role, of course, of identity and identity development. Our journeys and pathways to understanding the beautiful representation of queerness and transness is our individual journeys and is also indicative of a larger community that we become part of. Part of that is also understanding motivations within ourselves. Within education scholarship, folks often use the word resilience to talk about the grit and the tenacity to continue through an educational journey even when there are negative experiences. Well, I want to problematize that notion of resilience because it makes it seem like we are either succeeding or we're not succeeding. And as folks in CDE can attest to, the journey and pathways to education are much messier and much more beautiful than a linear binary trajectory of we're succeeding or we're not succeeding. The next thing I wanted to talk about is relationships. So for queer and trans folks, we have the blessings of having chosen and biological family a lot of the time. And so there's deep conversations about kinship and relationships and community. Also within that is the complicated relationship for some of us with biological family as it relates to finances and identity disclosure, and some things that may be coming forth during COVID-19 as we are, many of us, living with biological or chosen family. At the heart of student success is relationships with peers, faculty, and staff. So Alex is going to talk a great deal about peer relationships in community and organizations at UVM, like student organizations or other environments within the UVM landscape. And then faculty staff are also a critical role for academic and social experiences. In fact, my scholarship has shown that so much of our academic success as queer and trans people is nested on the relationship with influential faculty mentors. Next, institutionally, programs and policies are critical for all students within and outside the classroom. Yet, I would argue that most college administrators have not acknowledged or taken a step forward to recognize their role and responsibility in fostering success among queer and trans people. Again, this goes to the invisibility of queer and trans people in the landscape of higher education. Finally, societally, there's a lot going on in the last month for queer and trans people. The Supreme Court ruling for non-discrimination in the workforce, the oppressive and transphobic policies coming from Betsy DeVos and the Trump administration about Title IX and Health and Human Services, blatant queerphobia and transphobia, particularly for trans Black people navigating institutionalized racism in our society and police brutality, and just broadly the political turmoil for people with marginalized identities right now in a very hostile national government, particularly for queer and trans people. There are two key concepts that I want to briefly mention that are so important when talking about success and supports. One is belongingness. Terrell Strayhorn is a higher ed scholar, and he defines belongingness as students' perceived social support on campus and whether or not they feel connected, like they matter, and like they feel like they're cared about by people. The second is campus climate. And basically, campus climate is the warmth or chilliness of spaces. And so when you go into a new environment and you feel welcomed and affirmed, folks might consider that a warm campus climate. If you go into a place and you feel slighted, you feel invisible, you feel like your identities are not being celebrated, folks would consider that a chilly campus climate. So belongingness and campus climate can have a really important impact on success, and that relates so strongly to support and resources. I think I'll end it there and pass it to Alex.
Hi, everyone. I want to echo some of the things that Jay had said earlier. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm happy to be here to share kind of what I know about queer and trans resources and student support here at UVM. I do want to talk primarily about, kind of the PRISM Center, where I am working at, and some of the things that we are doing to help support y'all during your time here at UVM and beyond that also. So the PRISM Center is an established university department, and we're here to support LGBTQIA2S+ students here at UVM. And just like some background around the folks in our office. So there's typically 4 of us full-time staff folks here to support you in all of your needs. And some of our larger events that we typically hold throughout the year, we have like a fall welcome back, where we just kind of want to welcome not only our returning students, but all of our incoming students to a queer LGBTQ space where they can feel welcomed and affirmed. Know that you all have folks here who want to support you in all of your endeavors, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And then we also have an event we call Home for the Holidays at the end of the fall semester, where going into winter break can be difficult for a lot of folks, going home to difficult family situations, but we want to remind people that they always have a home here at UVM, and there are people here who care about them, and also like giving folks all those good warm and fuzzy feelings, hopefully, about the holiday season, regardless of what they have to experience at home. And then finally, celebrating all of the hard work of our queer and trans graduates at our rainbow graduation ceremony that we hold at the end of May. Some of you may have attended this year. We had a remote rainbow graduation for the first time, and it was a super fantastic experience to hear experiences of some of our graduates from the HESA program with Jay, and also some of our undergraduate students who really grew during their time here at UVM and wanted to share their experiences with everybody. So other things that the PRISM Center does to help support students, we hold throughout the year a number of smaller groups. So whether that's some of our affinity spaces, which are closed spaces to specific identity groups. So we have spaces for queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, folks of color. We been holding a bi-weekly aromantic and asexual space. Some other spaces, we had a trans and non-binary space, bi-pan space. Sure, I'm forgetting a few other ones in there. But basically offering an opportunity for folks to kind of gather in small spaces with people who have similar experiences to them outside of the larger queer and trans community, because certainly experiences of trans folks and non-binary folks are different from those of gay folks or bisexual folks or pan folks or what have you. So, and then we also hold some other small events like our queer community dinner every week, which is just like a really great opportunity for people to kind of gather over food and spend time together. But we always want to make sure that we're providing as many spaces where folks can just kind of be in community with one another, and then also having an opportunity to talk about some of those squishy, educational, unsure moments around, Jay was talking about identity development, right? Everybody has a lot of questions about, hey, I'm experiencing XYZ, or do you also experience this? I think I was listening to a TED Talk, and a lot of the times folks are asking the question, am I normal? Yes, you are normal. A lot of other folks are going through what you're going through too, and we want to provide space to have those conversations as well. Our center is also just very generally trying to be very mindful of the needs of students in all spaces, and we want to make sure that you can focus on other aspects of your college experience besides your basic needs. So our center also has food resources, I think like a food pantry, where folks can come and get snacks, but also get like full-fledged meals like rice and beans and that kind of thing. And then we also have a computer lab where folks can print. I think it's the cheapest printing on campus. It's like 3 cents a page for black and white. And then you can also stop there between classes if oh, I have to work on something really quick. You can always stop by and hang out in there. We also have an emergency fund. It's open to all students, but specifically, it's really focused on supporting queer and trans students in emergency situations. So, for example, if you needed housing support or medical support for any reason, that's something that you could certainly apply for also. Currently, since we're not in our office, unfortunately, these aren't necessarily things you'd be able to access in the moment, but our hope is in our eventual return to in-person services that you all would be able to access all of those really great resources over at Allen House, which, if you all don't know exactly where we're located, it's at the corner of Main Street and Prospect, down the street from Waterman and from the Davis Center down Main Street. But generally, we just want to create more opportunities to help queer and trans folks feel successful at the university, and that is also included building skills for our student leaders who are often extremely involved, but not necessarily getting all the opportunities they need to learn. How can I be a better community member and a better leader in my activist spaces or, in my leadership spaces? And we want to, provide opportunities for folks to learn about that. So like understanding, like Jay was saying, systems of oppression, and also, in that spirit of uplifting, like how do I practice self-care or community care? How do we take care of each other in all of these, uncertain times, and then also just like the day-to-day. How do we be successful? How do we thrive, not just survive? And that's pretty much all I have to say about the PRISM Center. There's a million other things that we do, but certainly if from some of the day-to-day things, if you're having like difficulty with class situations, then we're here to support you with that. Or, if you're like, hey, how do I access gender inclusive housing? We're here to answer those questions as well. So, I think that new this year, right, there's a gender inclusive housing forum. I don't think that it's available to returning students, but I know that it's available to incoming students, where there's an opportunity to write or in a drop down, what gender roommate you would prefer to have or feel comfortable having. So that way, trans folks can request to live with other trans folks or people with a gender identity that's similar or different from them, or whatever helps folks feel most comfortable in their living situations, because certainly that can make a really big impact on your time here at UVM. Otherwise,
thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, Alex. I just wanted to step in with a question. We have a question from Laura Gonzalez, and she's the Safe Zones trainer. It's a QT Club advisor and professor of anthropology at Miramar College, which is a community college in San Diego. Thank you, Laura, for joining us today. Laura asks that, she says this forum's mainly geared towards our students for right now at the University of Vermont, but could you address how to hold these kinds of affinity groups when the populations are very small? And she continues that she would love to host groups focus on the experience of people of color, but there may not be enough students who will attend those meetings. So is she doing violence by asking them to participate together? So that's a two-part question. Is when you have a smaller population, how do you hold these kinds of affinity groups? And is it problematic if it's also, allies are also invited? So Alex, I will turn that over to you, but then afterwards, if Jay or Mara would like to add to that, that would be welcome.
For sure. I will first say that certainly as we hold a number of our smaller affinity spaces, the number of folks showing up to that space is certainly going to be smaller and smaller. I will say that I think that it's just important to hold the space, even if not a lot of students will show up. That's certainly a show of solidarity and support to just visibly have a space that exists for those students. Even if they don't necessarily participate, they know, hey, there is a space here for me. I don't necessarily think I would say that it would be doing violence on those communities by asking them to participate together, but I do want to acknowledge that the experiences of QT BIPOC people are so different from white, queer, and trans folks that having that separate space to talk about the intersections of race and sexuality and gender is really important for folks. So if the concern, I hear your concern about the number of folks, showing up to those spaces, and I can, also say that sometimes we've had a hard time getting a large number of folks to show up to those spaces, but I do know that, for the few students who do show up, the 3 to 5 students who show up in those spaces, they mean a lot to them.
Can you hear me all right? Okay, great. Yeah, like 100% agreeing with everything Alex said. I wanted to add a couple of things. First, relying on a critical mass can be problematic administratively. particularly for queer and trans people who may not disclose their identities, and there aren't as many of us. So institutionally, some administrators may use the critical mass argument to not provide resources. So never let the number of people prevent you from offering services. As Alex mentioned, there's power in visibility, even if few people use those resources directly. An invitation is not a burden as long as you give people the chance to decline. And so sometimes folks with marginalized identities do want to be asked. And we also want to be able to give the option of saying, no, thank you. And then finally, as a white queer, I just want to emphasize that my learning was understanding the difference between an affinity space and a learning space. So when you promote these materials, make sure that you're stating that it's an affinity space just for cutie POC people, so that well-intentioned white people don't come and in a space that isn't meant or created for them.
Participants who would like to look into some of the great resources that you mentioned that are available at the Prison Center at University of Vermont. Is there a link that we can share, or some place that we can guide those who are maybe interested to find out more about some of those groups and events that you mentioned, that they can look into it further? Oh, you're muted right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you. So folks can always visit our website, on the UVM website for the Prism Center. If you just search us up there, it should be like the first result that pops up. And then otherwise, the best way to find the most recent information from us actually is on our social media. So if you follow us on Instagram, our handle is @PrismUVM. And then if you also follow us on Facebook, we try to keep all of our events and Facebook events up there. So if you're trying to figure out what's happening next at the Prism Center, it's usually on either of those places.
Alex, do you want to come back and keep going on some of the information about supporting students at home?
Yes, absolutely. I did, if you want to go back really quick, I just want to talk about the student orgs really briefly. So there are two primary student organizations right now at UVM. There's the Queer Student Union, or QSU, and it's primarily an undergraduate group, but I know that there are some grad students who float in and out of that group as well. And they historically meet every week, and they try to do a good job of balancing the social, educational, and activist needs of all of our students. And then there's also OSTEM, or Out in STEM, which is a group for LGBTQIA+ folks who are in STEM, science, tech, engineering, math, though they have like a very broad definition of what STEM actually means. So if you're in a sciencey field, you're certainly welcome to join them. And they're a graduate and an undergraduate group, though they meet at the same time because there's not a large group with them. But yeah. So supporting college students at home. So this is about for you all to celebrate, queer and trans students to celebrate yourselves, and then also for all of our advocates and allies who are joining us today. So celebrate them or celebrate yourself. Like Jay was saying, we are resilient and fantastic and individuals who are just have a lot of worth as ourselves as human beings. And it's June, so it's Pride Month. We're getting all these messages about celebrating Pride. And certainly the first Pride was a protest and a riot. So we're really re-envisioning, what does Pride really mean? So celebrate what Pride means to you. If that's, having a bunch of rainbow gear and parading around socially distanced wherever you're at, then by all means go ahead and do that. Or, creating art at home by yourself that, talks about LGBTQI plus experiences or your experience. Or if you take a moment to do some education, learn about queer and trans history, learn about Stonewall, all of Marsha P. and Sylvia, all the things that happened that day, the histories of queer and trans, specifically trans women of color, in the movement for queer and trans justice, And then just also acknowledging how our identities are a part of us and make us who we are. Certainly wherever folks are at in their journey, whether that's, coming to terms with your gender or sexuality, or still experimenting, questioning, that's okay. Wherever you're at is perfectly fine. And then also really important, I think, during this time to create space for grief. So, I know for a lot of our students that UVM is their home, and a lot of their chosen family is here. So making space for, losing, some of the regular contact that you might have with folks in your chosen family, and a sense of home that you might have normally being here at UVM. And just like with all the uncertainty there is, and just, it's so important to acknowledge that loss and all those feelings, and so that we can move through them in order to, decide how we want to recreate those connections in a digital space, whether that's, setting time aside to talk with folks on FaceTime or over the phone, or, there's been a number of virtual events, both from Outright and then from the Pride Center downtown, where folks can connect with people. A number of virtual events coming out of the Prism Center. We had our zine workshop last week. We have our open mic on Friday. So connecting with people virtually is extremely important. And then that's also a part of navigating unsupportive family situations. So like, do the number one thing, that we want to offer for you all is to stay safe. Safety is the number one most important thing. So do whatever feels safest for you. If you want to, you're certainly, if you can, have like a conversation with folks in your family and tell them how important it is to have their support, and reassuring that you're the same person that you have always been, and that they've loved and come to know. And also provide educational resources if that's something you have space for. But again, I really want to emphasize how important it is that considering your safety in your home environment is really important. And if you can't do any of those things, or don't have capacity or what have you, then like creating space for yourself to be authentic. Like I said, celebrate yourself however you can, whether that's, alone time in, a space that belongs to you, like a room, or like going outside for a walk, however that looks like. And like I said, connecting with chosen family, extremely important. Attending virtual events, making sure that you're still maintaining a sense of community can be really helpful in combating some of the isolation a lot of folks are feeling right now. And then I just wanted to take a brief moment to really highlight the experiences of queer and trans, Black, Indigenous people of color are feeling right now. Jay talked about it briefly, but there was so much violence happening in the Black community. We want to make sure that we're acknowledging, the intersections of race and sexuality and gender as well. There's violence not only happening in the Black community, but especially for our Black trans folks, especially for Black trans women. And this is not to say, right, like, there's all this disparaging, deficit, like Jay had talked about, for our community, but also this is just to say that we, specifically like our advocates and allies, we really need them to step up and educate themselves and uplift Cutie BIPOC voices right now. So we want to celebrate all of the lives of our Cutie BIPOC folks. So whether that's supporting, Black businesses, Cutie BIPOC-owned businesses, or artists. A while ago on our Prism Instagram page, we, noted a bunch of accounts that you can follow. Go follow them and see what they're up to. So make sure that you're supporting Cutie BIPOC folks in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, so much. And again, to repeat what you said in terms of if people would like to find out more about the Prism Center, You can go to the UVM webpage and search there, or probably just Google PRISM and then search their social media pages. And it sounds like additionally there you can find other resources to other social media pages and other places where people might find interest. Thank you also, Jay, I wanted to say, for introducing that deficit model way of looking at things. I think it's pretty shocking realization once you point it out to see that that is how things are framed. And hopefully that's something that people will carry moving forward when they do their own, research or identity navigation or speaking with their families in that way. So our final presenter, we have Mara Iverson. She's the Director of Education at Outright Vermont, which is a nonprofit business that's been building hope, equity, and power with the LGBTQ plus youth in Vermont since 1989. Thank you for being here, Mara.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk a little bit during my section about what are the ways that we can provide connection for people while we're in social distancing, and specifically while we're in summer, because even were we not in social distancing, summer is a time when a lot of queer and trans folks go back to spaces, towns, homes, where they may not have the same breadth of access to the to just the person that they've been able to become while they're in a space that's more understanding or more supportive or has more resources. So just thinking a little bit about what options do we have, and then what might be barriers to those options, and then how can we counter the barriers. So one thing that I will mention is that Outright's programming is exclusive to youth. We don't serve adults. So our tagline right now is, for the most part, like serving youth through their teens. So we predominantly serve youth up to about roughly age 19. And then if there are some older, like, in that like 2021 group that want to access programs, they are absolutely welcome to do so. There just tends to be at the moment like a disproportionate 13, 14-year-old like heft. And I have found that some 20-year-olds do not love hanging out with 14-year-olds, just my experience. But the point is that stuff is there, and there are ways to, once you're in contact with an organization that has supports, they have connections to other organizations that have supports. So getting an in to any one door is a way to get access to other doors. So one of the ways that you can access Outright specifically for recommendations and connections is to just contact us by emailing info@outrightvt.org. And we have information on organizations throughout the entire state of Vermont, but we also have information on some organizations that are more nationally located. And I like to say we are keyword professionals. So a lot of people will write folks off who have questions about, like, I don't know how to find this and that thing. And then people will say, well, but there's Google, so you could find anything you want. And there is Google, but there are sometimes vocabularies of words that you don't necessarily know to look for. So it may be that you need support from people who are used to Googling the things that you are looking for. So even if it is just that you need a direction to go in your own searches, reaching out to organizations who have some of that knowledge is a great place to start. So one of the things that we do offer are online support groups and online social opportunities. And the first thing that we had to confront when we were dealing with the COVID-19 crisis was the fact that, especially for like a state like Vermont that often has rural spaces that have difficulty with internet connection, or there are students that don't have access to technology, we had to think about what we could do to try to make programming available to the maximum number of students possible. There is nothing that we can do about the internet access itself, although one of the things that we did do was start tapping into our network of other grown-ups who live in different places, who have literally offered things like, you could sit on my lawn socially distanced and connect to the internet in my yard if that would be helpful to you. So there are workarounds that we can imagine. That's about the overcoming barriers piece. Another piece about accessibility for youth is that sometimes they don't have access to the exact programs that you're using for support. So for example, we use Zoom primarily, but there are some people who have devices that that can't connect to Zoom. And so another question is, can you find a device that can connect to the program that you're offering the thing on? And we also have lots of youth who have concerns about privacy and safety. As folks before me have mentioned, people are often stuck at home with people that they don't always spend their time with in quite this quantity anymore. So it's a difference of people being involved in each other's private information just because access is completely different. So we do have students who they aren't out at home, or they are maybe out to some people but not out to others, and there are some who, even if they are out, it isn't safe or it isn't comfortable, and so they don't talk about it at home. And so we have to think about things like, well, can that student be having an out loud Zoom conversation in their household, and what are the alternatives for those sorts of things? So one of the things that actually our creative young folks came up with was that a lot of them access programs on phones and go for a walk to a place in town that has advertised that their free Wi-Fi will keep going, like a library or something like that. And so they go on their walk with their phone, and then they can connect in ways that are safe for them. So that's something that I think is, for me, number one questions are, how do we give access to people for the programs that we are offering, and how do we make sure that we're doing it in a way that's safe for them to access? And we'll do the brief overview of programs that we offer. We offer tons and tons of online things right now, and quite frankly, at this point, they're starting to all look the same, even though that they're all slightly different programs. Normally, in the before times, Friday night group was youth in different cities going to a centralized location on a routine basis and getting together in a social circle with pizza or something along those lines. And the same for trans group, except that trans group is limited to transgender and gender nonconforming folks and only meets once a month instead of every week. And then drop-in is we have a center in Burlington where people can drop into the space, and we have some of the similar supportive elements that Alex mentioned for the PRISM Center. So those things are all amazing things that during the before times, and once we get past this, the after times we'll be able to access. But right now, most of our offerings are online. So what we do is every Friday night, 6:30 to 8 o'clock, we are online and accessible for Friday night group. And we've actually started to have quite a few students, even from outside of Vermont, start checking in, which is a really, really neat opportunity. So if you're watching from a place that isn't Vermont, the beauty of the internet is that it's borderless, and we have 0% interest in turning people away because you might happen to be located in Virginia. So things to think about in there. The actual intervals of when we offer things have remained pretty much the same. You can find that information on our website page. I did want to talk about a pretty cool program that we offer every year, which is Camp Outright. And Camp Outright is offered to younger youth, so like in the 13 to 17 range. And then a lot of our camp counselors are in that like 21 to 23 range. So in a normal setting, we would go full on to a camp in Starksboro, Vermont, and we would have gay people in the trees time, which is what the students sometimes call it. Working with youth is the best, is it not? Gay people in the trees time. Anyway, we are not going to be in person this year, and so instead we've got a virtual opportunity for camp instead. And the key that we're looking at here is a reality that some of the things that are the most critical to youth are things that we can't reproduce in virtual settings. And that is just the physical ability to be around other people, to hug them, to touch them, to share affection in ways that sometimes they aren't able to in other areas of their lives. And though those things can't necessarily be reproduced, acknowledging that that is a loss that we have, and like Alex said, grieving that loss, is a way for people to manage and then set to a different place that desperate desire that's really important and that sometimes we are limited on meeting right now. So that remains important in all of our access pieces too, that we recognize that there's just stuff that's vital that can't happen the same way. But there's other stuff that can. And the nice thing is that, for instance, we only have so many beds at camp, and there is no limit to the number of people who can be involved in virtual things. So there's actually an opening and an expansion there. And we have an opportunity to do things that connect people together, like sustaining our camp traditions, and we can still sing the camp song. We have a tradition at the end of camp where everybody has had a brown paper bag and you write notes to each other all week about how awesome everybody is, and then as they check out, they get their bag and they read it in the minivan on the way home, and everyone cries and weeps forever. It's adorable. And we're in the process of figuring out how to do a virtual version of that. So I think that that is another critical thing as you're looking for activities for students to do, or if you're thinking of creating them yourself, try to recreate some of the things that are deeply meaningful to people, even if they need to look a little different. And Outright also offers annual events. So last night we just had our lavender commencement, and it was stupid adorable, as you can probably imagine. We also offer Leadership Day each year. This year it was Leadership Week because, again, we were all virtual, so we were able to have events over the course of a whole week where we had out legislators talk to youth about the experience of being an out representative in the state. Or we had the person who is currently the Vermont Supreme Court Chief Justice, but who was also the lead lawyer on the Vermont civil unions case, came and talked about the history of that case with the students and the elements of law work that we still have to do. Queer and Allied Youth Summit is a big gathering of youth every year, and this year we again couldn't have getting everybody in space together, but we did still manage to have a whole conference day that had workshops where students could go into different virtual breakout rooms. We based things in Discord, which is a place that a lot of youth are already hanging out, and I think that's another critical key that we've been working on as an organization, and that other universities and even high schools and middle schools are trying to think about. Where do you reach students where they are, but also without invading their space? So for instance, we created a channel to run the Queer and Allied Youth Summit with the understanding that we would then leave it when the summit was over, and that turned it over entirely to the students, and that the grown-ups wouldn't be in the space anymore. So just the annual events are things that are supposed to offer opportunities that might be different from things that are offered at school. We also do offer parent groups, and your kid can be age 13, your kid can be age 25, and if you have a queer or trans kiddo, you can come to the support groups and talk to one another, which is really critical for not processing your junk with your own kid. And if you are a youth who is really tired of your grown-up processing all their junk with you and bringing up all of your okay, well, I know you're learning stuff, but also ouch, that's a thing that you can offer to families, that they can come and connect with one another and get ideas without having to process through the child at the same time.
Jess, we can't hear you for some reason. You're unmuted, but we'll just come back to you in just 1 second. I wanted to just share, thank you everybody. Such great information, so many resources for students and for family members to support our queer and trans students as well. Thank you so much for sharing all of that today. I really appreciate it. I can only imagine that our participants have learned a lot today. I know that I have. And so we wanted to offer a digital badge for your participation because UVM is about continuing your education. And so we want to recognize the time that you've taken today to learn about some of the ways that you can support queer and trans students, especially during a pandemic. And so you'll see here a digital badge, and the badge and the little icon is there that you'll get specifically for the badge for this participating in this webinar. It's really easy to do if it's something you're interested in. We'll include a link in the follow-up as well to how you can claim your badge and then the process to actually do that. And it's a really great way to share on your LinkedIn. It's essentially today's resume, is to have these credentials and these digital badges that show the types of things that you're interested in learning and continuing your education. So I'm hoping we can hear Jess, and I just wanted to toss it back to you as well as we continue to wrap up, and I'll double check to see if there's any other questions. Jess, are you able to join us? I think you might be frozen. And back to what Mara was saying about internet issues in Vermont, right? So don't we all know?
Are you able to hear me now? Okay, great. I'm so sorry about that. I don't think I'll use AirPods next time. This was my first test with AirPods, so I'm not quite there yet. I'm not quite hip enough, I think, for the AirPods. But I so appreciate our presenters today. I have learned so much from them, even when I thought I had already learned things prior to today from them, but I've learned even more. I really appreciate the time. We have 3 minutes left in respecting everyone's time, or maybe five minutes, Mara saying?
No, just raising my hand to say a thing about a question that I see in the chat box.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, so Ren Pyle asked, where do I find links to these Friday night groups? And Jay Garvey, like a freaking hero, went and found the link on our website. But one of the things you will not find there is the link to the actual groups, because one of our safety and security features is we don't put the link to the actual spaces anywhere online, so that we can avoid Zoom bombing and people coming in and creating painful spaces. So if you email info@outrightvt.org, or if you go to that link, they are going to tell you to email info@outrightvt.org. That's just something to be aware of nationwide. A lot of folks who are doing work with like queer and trans community, and specifically cutie BIPOC community, are trying to be really gentle around who gets access to the space so that people can't come in and create pain. So just be aware.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm just going to put it out to our presenters for any last closing words or any other resources that you would like to mention, and we'll just see if any other last questions come up. But if anybody would like to add any parting words. Well, thank you all so much again. And as Nicole mentioned at the start, this was recorded, so this will be emailed to everybody who registered in a few days. And there should be links included in it if you have any questions to follow up with anybody from any of the groups that we are here representing today. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Jay, Mara, and Alex. Such a great and valuable discussion today. Really appreciate the time that all of you took to participate in this panel discussion. And thank you to everybody who participated today. Keep an eye out for the follow-up with some of these links and the opportunity to earn that digital badge for participation today. We wish you well and good health. Stay safe, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.